Thanks, Liz, for that. The Bible reading, it was a tough, it's a tough Bible reading, that one. Very tough. I thought I was going well when Ray gave us all these different topics to preach on, and the first topic he gave me was trials and temptations, and I thought that was pretty tough. And when I read this, I probably went into about an hour of prayer, these verses. So over the last few weeks, and I won't go through them again, but we've had many parts or bits of James. Today is about submitting yourself to God. And some Bible versions of the Bible have different headings for this. Like the Message says, get serious. In NIV, it has different. And then a couple of other versions, the Good News has verse 1 is quarrels and verse 7's submitting to God, and the last two verses are about judging others, as the Bible reading has. I'm going to use the NIV version of the Bible for as I talk to it, not the Message version that was up there, and it's just as hard-hitting. In James chapter 4, he starts off the first three verses around quarrels. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on pleasure. And I read those verses, and what really stuck in my mind was, I find it interesting how James addresses fights and quarrels with a question, and especially in NIV, follows it up with another question. Because the first question is, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desire that battle within you? Is the second question. So he actually asks us a question and then answers it with another question. James doesn't start how we normally do. Someone has an argument, you go up to them and say, and what went on, and they say, well, they did this, and I did this, and they did that. You go to the other person and they go, he did that, and I said this. But James says it comes from the heart. It starts with the root cause of all quarrels and arguments. Start in the heart. The battle is within you. So I went to Romans chapter 7 and verses 21 to 23. And Paul writes, I'll have to lift this up, the glasses. Yeah. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is there right with me. For my inner being is to delight in God's law. But I see another law at work within me, waging war against the law of my mind, making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. See, Paul had that same battle that James just spoke about in his everyday, and he knew that he had that same battle. So we all have a heart condition, which is not in our physical heart, but a battle within our spiritual heart, a battle between our heart really and our mind. James says, so we kill. And when you look at the internet and you go back, the Greek translation straight out is murder is the word they use. And if we go to Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, and we find this in Matthew, and it is the book of Matthew, Lindsay, not Matt. There's a little funny story there Ray, a few weeks ago, wrote a note for Lindsay. Look up Matt. He goes to the Bible and he can't find the book of Matt. So I thought that was a good lesson to us all. Some people who haven't been brought up in the church or been in the church for a long time don't get our abbreviations. And I thought it was quite humorous at the time, but it also made me look at when we abbreviate words, because if someone said to me, look up Matt, I would look up Matthew. Not picking on you, Lindsay, I just thought it was an honest mistake, and it actually shows that we have to be careful. So in Matthew chapter 5 verses 21 and 22, you have heard that it is said, the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject of a judgment. But I tell you, anyone who is angry with their brother or sister will be subject to judgment. See, murder starts in the heart. It doesn't start with the stabbing or the shooting, the strangulation, or whatever way you do. It starts in your heart. James asserts the differences we have with others is rooted in selfish pride, affairs of the heart. Do you have a problem controlling your tongue, as in chapter 3? And what pride was to blame. Prejudice, pride is to blame. You're in this continual conflict around you. Same answer, pride is to blame. Let's think about this and ask ourselves some questions. What was the last argument engaged in? What current events have caused you to lash out at others? What physical differences lead you to distrust or mistreat others? What secular difference between you and other Christians damaged the time you spend together? In other words, pride and prejudice is at the root of the problems. When we define ourselves by the pride we have in our country or in our symbols or in our institutions, in our race, in our rights, in our politics, in our anything, more than our relationship with each other and with God, that's when we've made conflict with others. James then makes two statements about prayer. We're going to cover prayer off. I think Ray's going to preach about that in a couple of weeks here, and then we're going to do a full session on a full series on prayer. He says, you do not have because you do not ask God. That's his first question. Then he says, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you have on your pleasure. The answers to do those two statements are fairly simple. You do not have because you do not ask God. And I thought up a new word, or I thought up a new word here, but I hadn't. I found it in the dictionary. The simple answer is prayerlessness. It's a word. If it's a word, and I know it's now a word, it's just a failure comes up in the dictionary as a failure to pray. And that's a problem in itself, that failure to pray. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. You are praying with the wrong intention. Personal passions or your desires that are not in line with God's will or against his word. Many people say God didn't answer my prayer. They blame God. But have they questioned their own motives in their heart? Because God knows best. Moving along then to verses 4 to 6, James expands on the first 3 verses. You adulterous people, you don't know that friendship with the world means enmity against God. Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Or do you think Scripture says without reason that he jealously longs for the Spirit that he has caused to dwell in us? But he gives us more grace. That is what and why the Scripture says, God opposes the proud but shows favour to the humble. Adulterous people is an interesting statement. He's talking about our relationship with God and being unfaithful to God. A couple of Friday nights ago, we had hymns of praise at my house, and we played Daniel O'Donnell's song. It's called Marriage of a Lifetime, where he wrote and sang about his relationship with Jesus Christ. It's like a marriage of a lifetime. And here, James is calling people adulterous because of that same reason, meaning we've not been faithful to God. In this section, John says his readers are guilty of behaving from fundamentally wrong motives. They're acting forward of each other in bad faith. He says they seek both to fulfill their evil desires and have friendships with the world, therefore rejecting their spiritual yearning for God. It's in our humility that we draw near to God. And it had me thinking about my life, and especially my professional life. And I've got a few confessions I've got to go through here. Because when you study for a sermon, or you prepare a children's talk, you do a lot of self-reflection. So when I sought the approval of my professional peers more than my spiritual relationship with God, I was actually really seeking friendship with the world. When I let my social or political alliances affect how I view Scripture and other Christians, again I was seeking friendship with the world. When I'm willing to justify and forgive something in a person I agree with on a secular matter, but hold you as a different view as a Christian to even harsher standards, I'm seeking friendship with the world. See, it's easy to get drawn into that secular world. No matter how you justify yourself or rationalise that, I was fighting some greater good, such behaviour rejects God. And I thought about it, and I think I've done a lot of it in my lifetime, and I'm sure many of us have. In the next 4 verses, James has the answers. Submit yourself to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning, and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. In this section, verse 7 is often misquoted. People say, resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. But we have to do one thing first, and we miss that little bit in front of it. And that's submit yourself to God. By submitting to God, we have the power to resist the devil. We cannot resist the devil on our own. So that's the most key part of that verse, submit to God. James is very clear here and makes a case that we all have to reject pride and embrace humility to resist the devil. Pride and godliness cannot exist hand in hand, nor can godly humility and sin. If we can just set aside our pride, all of our pride, self-righteousness and self-justifications, then we can mature. We then can draw close to God. Then we can let go of our constant criticism of others and judgmental attitudes. Our foundation must be humility. I think back to the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5 and Jesus telling them how to live. And he goes, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. The meek, the mild, the humble, blessed are the meek. This leads to the last 2 verses that state, brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against his brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbour? Here James is very clear on judging one another, and we should not judge people, especially God's people, because God alone is the lawgiver and judge. I've got nothing more to say there, but I've got some final thoughts. So it is a sin for a person who knows to do what is good and doesn't do it. It seems a random statement in James, but in context, James is making a point here. We let our pride sometimes obscure what is good. Who is my neighbour? He makes it clear in a summation of his words about humble living, that we must be humble throughout and to pursue goodness. But who are you to judge your neighbour? This statement has to be kept in the larger context of the Apostles' writing and Jesus' teaching. James is clear, talking about unnecessary and mean-spirited criticism here, not exercising righteous judgment to overcome sin. I found it hard to read things like this and think that God okay with the secular battles that we as Christians sometimes have and get embroiled in, especially when we get caught up in the dishonesty and character assassination as a result. It is only our pride that justifies such behaviour, not our God. James, as I said a few weeks ago, is a challenging, hard-hitting book and very much to the point on how to live. And in closing, my favourite verse from today's, all of it is, and it's found in verse 7 and 8 of James chapter 4. Submit yourself then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you.